Welcome to the Sacred Emergence podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Wong, and I'm so thrilled that you're here. This is a place where you'll be guided to living your most aligned life so that your truest, most radiant self can emerge. We'll be jamming on topics ranging from spirituality, entrepreneurship, to wellness and lifestyle design, and everything in between that can support you to grow, evolve, and shine, all the while not taking ourselves too seriously. So if you're ready to step into your leadership, break through limiting beliefs, own all of who you are, and expand in abundance, grab yourself your faith cup of tea and let's dive in. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Sacred Emergence. I have such a treat for you all. Today with us is Betsy Murphy, who is a writer, a teacher, and a performer. And I'm so excited to have you here, Betsy. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, well, you and I met at a Koya retreat, I think, back in, 2015?
7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah.
In Bali, even
in
better. Was it Bali?
Yeah, Bali. And I feel like I might have already gotten your book, like the
It had just come out in 2014,
Okay.
at the end of 2014. Yeah, and so we were in Bali, I think in 2015.
Yeah, and so it's just been really fun seeing your, because I think you've held, since then, you've held a lot of Koya retreats in Bali, and you've held a lot of writing workshops, and I'm so excited to dive into today's topic on writing an orgasm. I'm like, oh my God, that is incredible. So yeah, I'm just excited to dig in and see what's going to come up.
Good. I feel like the topic of writing an orgasm really defined two places in my life that we can get stuck. Because they talk about writer's block, and we talk about, my first book talked about why I faked orgasm. And, when you say that at first, people laugh or then there's something wrong with you. And, nothing was wrong with me. It was, I lived in a culture that silences women. And so I didn't have the conversation, the words were 6 to speak up about what happened to me. But then when I was 40 and was still having assaults against my body, I still wasn't speaking up. So literally our body can get stuck with emotions and leading to not being able to feel our natural way to express ourselves in the same way that we can get writer's block.
Oh my gosh, that's that parallel, that connection, and especially with your work now, because you teach writing and you've written books and, you do movement, you teach movement and stuff. So it's beautiful to see how it's all unfolded. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's interesting because when I started Koya, which was more than 10 years ago, and the first retreat I ever went on, if people don't know, Koya is a combination of dance, yoga, and feminine movement, but there's no way to do it wrong. And what you're doing is paying attention to the places in your movement that feel good and doing more of that. And at the time, I couldn't feel anything in my body, my lower half of my body. I was quietly doing this orgasm research in my late 40s, trying to understand why I couldn't feel anything. And it's interesting because when people say, well, I've had similar experiences that you've had, I've never felt safe in my body, or I was raped in college, or had some sort of trauma, and something's wrong with me, what do I do? And what I don't say is, go to this, sex expert or go read this book. It's you are the expert on your body. And that's what I had to do, to become the expert on my body. And so it wasn't just about understanding how my body worked just through the connection with my genitals. It also, Koya was such a great influence in understanding how doing the movements of my body that felt good and doing more of those. And that's directly related to what we want to accomplish in orgasm, what feels good and can we do more of that, and what doesn't feel, really being present. And so many of us, especially our partners who I mean, I feel bad. I didn't say enough to my partners, offering saying, slow down or go even slower. I mean, we were raised on sex that looks like it's hard and fast, and that we see in movies, and this is not what our bodies want. So it's just one thing I do in writing retreats, and if I'm working with women on reclaiming their bodies, is I just ask them to do something for 15 minutes. So whether it's exploring their genitals for 15 minutes, or they're giving themselves a self-massage for 15 minutes, or writing from a writing prompt for 15 minutes. You don't have to do it more than that. It's just starting to retrain your body. And the one thing, when I was like too scared to, go, I don't know, I'm in my 40s, and here's on my bucket list to have an orgasm. Most people's bucket list for being 50 is like traveling the world. And I'm like, I just want to have an orgasm before I die.
Oh my goodness.
But like nobody knew that. And once again, I just started this practice of 15 minutes a day, and I won't say how many days it took. And once again, this is no teachers, no toys, no nothing, just myself, my hands, my bodies. Our fingers have, other than our genitals, our fingers have the highest number of neural pathways on them. So, it's okay to explore with toys, but let your fingers know your body too, because you're going to have so much more feeling if you understand your body first before you go to the toys.
I love that. And I just love like your perspective on like not going to an expert, and like be your own expert. And that's like so much of like, when I talk about inner leadership, it's like you already have the tools within you. And so like, this is such a personal journey, especially with like an orgasm. So I just love that you invite people to go in within themselves first, and to explore that. Because at the end of the day, that's what's most important, right? That we really know ourselves.
Yeah. I think we live in this world of, we do need support. So it's great that we can talk to our friends about it. And maybe you do need the support of a class or a book or a coach, but in the end, do what feels good for you. So one thing I did was worked with a jade egg for a while, until I realized like I was done with it. So just because something worked for me doesn't mean, everybody else has to rush out and take that course. A big thing for me was people, after reading my book, started asking me, who was the yoni massage therapist you worked with? Who did you work with? And once again, working with the yoni massage therapist, the type of work I did was because I literally couldn't feel anything on the inside. When we experienced trauma, and mine had been unexpressed for 40 years, I literally couldn't feel anything on the inside of my vagina. So working with this massage therapist is, some people were like, you're paying for someone to, masturbate you? And I was like, no, I couldn't feel anything. So,
Yeah.
but what was interesting was, after my experience, people were saying, who did you go to? Who did you go to? And I started to take the training to become a yoni massage therapist, and halfway through stopped, because I'm not against it. And actually, if people are interested, the one person I recommend is Bonnie Bliss. And that's her website. She's out of Australia, and anybody she's trained is excellent. But I didn't want a woman who had already experienced damage and trauma, to put themselves in a situation where they could do more damage and trauma. And in the end, I was the one that needed to know my body. So it was being so patient with myself, but not booking myself into, 3 hours today, I'm going to figure out, my yoni. It was, 15 minutes at a time, 15 minutes at a time. There's a book several years ago that said you can become an expert if you do anything for 10,000 hours.
Right.
So I'm like, I'm going to commit to this. And 15 minutes a day, it could take like up to, 40 years, but I'm going to commit to this. But I really just, I want people to really know their body. And as women, for over 2,000 years, we have been information about our bodies has been suppressed. Information of using our voice has been suppressed. And so we need to start feeling sensual in our bodies, and having an orgasm is our body's natural way to express itself. And in the same way that with writing and doing spoken word is another way to express ourselves. And so going to writing, I compare it right now to, I've done a lot of therapy, and therapists are wonderful, but when I started writing was when my healing really processed, because I was able to figure things out in my life and connect the dots of things that had happened 40 years ago and where I am now in understanding myself. And it felt very empowering, in the same way that like Maria Kondo, who does the decluttering,
right.
Her book. I feel like writing, even for 15 minutes a day, part of it begins to declutter all these unexpressed stories that live in our hearts that are unspoken. And at first people will start writing and go, this is just terrible writing. And I'm like, just keep writing, because we have to get out all that unexpressed places of our heart and our pain before we can really get to what our soul wants to say. So just do it for 15 minutes a day, and do your own inner cleaning. And that's what writing to me, I did it because I always felt like I was a writer, and I loved it, but I didn't realize that it would be part of my medicine and part of my healing.
And I love that it's like small, right? The 15 minutes a day. And I just love, like, it's just what you were saying, going back to like with orgasm, it's like, go with what feels good, continue with what feels good.
Yeah.
And I don't know, there's just something so beautiful with that, because especially with writing, it's like being gentle on ourselves, so that we don't have to it's like, especially with writing that's personal and it's reflective, like, I don't think that can be judged as good or bad. Yeah.
We, in the writing circles, when I do workshops or retreats, we have a word that if people we'll write for 15 minutes, and I just give them a prompt, and it might be tell about the last time you trusted your intuition, and then they just write for 15 minutes, and it may end up being a story about their intuition. It may end up being a story about how they didn't trust their intuition, or it may be something else, but it's just trusting that wants to come through in the moment. And then we go around in a circle and read our stories, and every single person will want to say, this isn't very good, or I'm not a good writer, and they have the option to opt out. But they also have the option to start their story with, and I learned this from a friend who was in a writing retreat with me, to start it with the phrase, get a load of this. And then you read your story. So it just is, and so usually we all end up saying that, at the beginning, because we're like, in 15 minutes, we don't expect a masterpiece. But you know what? In 15 minutes, when we hear the story that comes through, I'm always amazed, because we're always leaning in and want to know more. And so I always talk about writing like being a way for the soul to express itself. And this is why I asked for our words to be witnessed as women. Up until now, 80% of the books and more than 80% of the movies that have come out have been by men. And so we just need to balance out the women's voices in the world. And I was surprised when I published my first book. I'd healed my body, I'd healed everything, I felt good in my body, but I got up to speak at a book event, and I started reading my story that I'd written, and my throat clenched, my shoulders hunched over, and I started crying, and I couldn't, and I kept going, oh, I'm sorry, I'm okay. And I realized that's because I wasn't used to speaking the story. And once again, we know that the throat is connected to the solar plexus and the chakras, the first, second, and third chakra, but especially the second chakra. And So if you're healing one area, it's going to impact the other area. And so I did the one thing that I was like, I can't do this story out, I keep crying. And I was like, well, then I need to say it more. I need to say it more out loud. And that's why I made the choice to turn the book into a spoken word show. And I remember when I was first doing it, it was really uncomfortable. But then it felt so good, because afterwards, when one person reads your book, they might come up to you and say, thank you. But when you have the energy of 300 people, that all of a sudden, there's a point where it kind of like the consciousness of your heart connects. And in that room, this is where I feel like we move beyond the self-help, self-healing world into collective healing. And I think that is so important for us to gather and listen. And I see this over and over again on my retreats, of women coming together, speaking their truth, that so many times they'll say, I've never shared this with anyone before. And they don't have to share it with the world, but sharing it in this little circle one time, their life completely changes. And a year later, it's interesting to see what they're doing.
Yeah. I mean, stories just connect us all, right? There's just something about sharing the truth, and there's just something about it that, it's like when someone's willing to just express their truth, their path, and what's happened, it's like instant connection, especially with women.
Yeah, it's interesting because my book about healing my body after years of being disconnected from assaults and being molested, and finally write this book, Autobiography of an Orgasm. It came out in 2014, and I hadn't even told my mother the stories from the book. And when it came out, people were quietly supportive. But there were several people that were well known that didn't want to come out to support it because of their careers in the traditional medical world.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it was, but they were saying, we're sharing this with our patients, we're sharing this with our clients, but we, aren't not comfortable giving an endorsement. Then fast forward to 2017 and the Me Too movement. And it was incredible to have so many people get up and speak their truth.
Yeah.
At the same time, what I felt like I did really well with my book and in my shows and in general when I'm working with writers is we don't want to get stuck in the pain. And so I told, the story's not focused on what happened to me. The story is focused on how I healed myself and what I did with that. And so, with so many people hearing, me too, and people don't want to listen. People, they're like, they're angry women. Well, yes, we're angry. We haven't shared these, that's just a part of our life we haven't shared. But how can we move from that anger to telling in a story in a way that it heals ourselves? And I think many women and men too are getting stuck in the anger phase, and you can't heal yourself. And I would also say it's been beautiful to have the women speak up, and I hope there's space for more men to speak up, because in the circles that I deal with, I constantly hear stories about men and the abuse. And if someone's abusing you, they have most likely been abused too. So I hope we can create a space for the men to speak up too, and for us to stop these cycles. My daughter's 28 years old, and I have 2 young grandchildren that are 2 and 3, 2 girls. And I don't want this to be a conversation in their life. I want it to be a conversation that rape doesn't exist 20 years from now.
Yeah, totally. I have to say, when I read your book, the first one, the Autobiography of an Orgasm, I'll put a link in the show notes. I was like, I read it and I couldn't stop reading it, because like your story was just like, some parts are hard to read, but it just needed to be read and shared. So like, this is a book that it just can't sit on my shelf. So I gave it away, and like, okay, it's meant to be passed on to other people. And then I remember, didn't you have like a second book come out with collective stories of other women?
Collective, yeah. So after Autobiography of an Orgasm came out, I started receiving stories from both friends, but mainly from people that I didn't know from all over the world, writing me emails saying, thank you so much. And this is my story. And I couldn't believe the stories that they were sharing. And then I realized, oh, they're sharing their stories because I gave them permission to finally say this for the first time. And so I quickly realized, like, we need to hear these other stories. And so I published 3 books of reader stories, and mostly women and some men, and it was very helpful because it's all different ages, and once again, this was just, there's healing in these stories. The stories aren't about what happened to them. The stories are about how they didn't just heal, but how they how they reclaimed these lost parts of themselves, and then that became part of their greater soul work.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, going back to Koya, which we started at the beginning, the one thing I love about Koya, because I was doing Koya and I was doing writing circles, and in these writing circles, I don't know if it was just me, but usually the stories that were coming up were, hard stories. And I do think sometimes people get with me because I've told a story that was hard to share, that they feel comfortable doing the same. But it can also be very upsetting and triggering. And so the beauty of Koya is we know that emotions can get stuck in our body. And so I combine Koya with the writing retreat. So it literally moves the story out of our body.
I love
so
that.
We can say these harder stories and then move it out of our body. And that's what our bodies are wanting to create space so that we can dance and write in the direction that we want our life to go now, with all of that past stuff off of us, out of us.
I love that. And so the people who come to the writing and movement, like the Koya retreats, is it not so that they can publish anything, just so that they could be better at writing it and expressing their story?
Well, some people just come because they want to explore writing, but many of them will say, I'm not a writer, but people keep telling me I should write a book.
Oh.
And so I love those people that come, because many of them do go on to write books, and that makes me really happy. And what they're surprised with is when we workshop their story. So I'll listen to their story, and then also within the group setting, we'll listen to each other's stories. And usually when people tell me their story, there's actually a line in the story, and that's the story. So it's like 10% of what they're telling me, we pull that out, and that then all of a sudden their story comes together. And we use these 15-minute writing prompts as a way to invite in different angles of the story that they might not be thinking about. And one of the writers on my retreats last year in Bali, who I'd never met, but she had read my book, and she came from Colombia, Tatiana Arias, as she just published her book in both Spanish and English, Love Heals. And she, it came out of a writing prompt. She came to write a book on financial happiness. And I was like, I don't do self-help. I do memoir, personal history, storytelling. And I was like, I'm not the one for you on financial happiness. And she's like, no, I want to work with you. And it's interesting because her book is so beautiful, and it talks about things that we don't normally talk about. But within the book, I didn't realize this because I was the editor for it. I didn't realize this until I was done with it, that we were done with it, that she did get in the financial happiness piece. And so once again, when we, you'll just be surprised how your stories start to come together, but you have to, it's like being an athlete, you have to start giving them some attention. So one thing I did last year was start the year with 40 days of writing prompts that people could join me, and I'd email them a writing prompt every day. And I had people from 8 countries all over the world doing them for 40 days. And it became so popular that people kept saying, well, can we do, 2 more weeks, or can I join the next round? I'm like, there's no next round. But I did 3 rounds of it, and then finally realized, oh, I have, a book. This is a book. So and in December of 2019, I released a book called Write On, a daily writing practice for anyone with a story to tell. And it's 365 days of writing prompts. And it's been really joyful we're doing this on 22 days into January, our interview. And I have people that have really stuck with it every day. And it doesn't matter. There's no rules with this book. I don't like books that say, if you don't follow these 7 steps, you have to start over. Like,
right.
Just open the page and believe that the prompt that comes up is meant for you that day, and write for 15 minutes. And then maybe you'll call your best friend or your mom and read it out loud for no feedback, just to read it out loud. So it's just getting us to move this creativity that is naturally inside of us. We are natural storytellers. We just forgot that we were told at one point that I was told at one point I wasn't a good dancer when I was 9, and in kindergarten I colored outside the lines, and so I stopped doing art. And we I find such pleasure in writing, even if it's not for a book, and I really find pleasure in gathering in a circle of women and listening to their stories.
I love that you said, like, sharing the story with no feedback.
Yeah, which is hard for people. And this is compares to Koya in my retreats, because the writers, like, they want feedback, and when we listen to the stories, we'll go around one by one, and the first couple of days maybe people don't want to read because they're worried about the writing. By day 3, everybody's reading, but we don't give any feedback, because I just want their voices to take up space. I want the words to take up space without worrying about doing it wrong. But in this last retreat to Bali, by the end of the 5th day, we started, since we weren't allowed to clap or give any positive feedback, what we did was we would slurp our Slurpees extra loud. So we found little ways, but yeah, and Koya is the same way. You will never be in a Koya class and hear the Koya teacher say, beautiful job, or nice movement. The idea is to go in and to say that to yourself if it feels good. And so we need more self-validation versus, because once again, as we started to say at the beginning, we are the experts on our bodies and our writing and our life.
I love that. And so I remember, like, during the Bali retreat, I think you shared that for your writing to come through, you also move daily, like you incorporate the Koya practices. Do you still do that?
Yeah, I do. I will do 15 minutes of movement. Sometimes it's putting on 3 songs and just letting 3 random songs and dancing, or doing a little bit of yoga. I love to go for walks. Sometimes if I go for a long walk in the morning before I write, by the time I get back to the house, I have so many ideas. It's like running back to a lover, So it's like some of my retreats, on a retreat to France once, I didn't let the writers write for the first 2 days because they were expecting it because I really wanted them to want it.
Yeah.
And by that, but what we did was like really nourish our body and nurture our bodies. And then, and that's what I want the writing to be. I want it to be like really fun and something that you look forward to, and not, for me, it's hard to understand writer's block. It doesn't exist anymore. If you feel like you have writer's block, then you're probably not telling the right story. And maybe get up and circle your hips a couple times. But this is where the prompts are so good. If you have writer's block, open the book to the prompts, or pull a card if you have a card deck like tarot cards, and use that as a prompt. Or use the next sign. We all talk about the synchronicities in our life. The next synchronicity, use that as a writing prompt, but just write for 15 minutes.
That is so good. When I saw you hosting retreats, I think like you had France and Indonesia, and like those are such, I don't know, they're just so like poetic
places. So like the environment is set up for it.
I always say, like, you don't need to go to France or Bali to write with me or to write your book. And that's a big thing. I was like, if you're not doing it, then how are you going to do it there? But I will say it's also a very nourishing environment when you have 3 beautiful meals made for you every day. We do some dancing and koya in the morning, and then we do our writing, and you feel supported. So, because writing can be a really lonely, a lonely thing, and that's when you don't know if it's any good because you're just writing on your own. And so for me, the shift from wanting to be a writer and then claiming myself, I claimed to be a writer before I ever thought about publishing a book. I had to say I am a writer, and I'm working on the story. Maybe it will become a book, but I am a writer. And then the next thing was to invest in writing workshops and retreats. You can do them online. You can find them in your community. Like to show up and have to have a deadline to deliver, work on a story. And here's the key thing. If someone's thinking about writing a book, you don't have to show up on a retreat with an idea for the whole book. On a retreat or even in a writing workshop, what I want you to do is write one good story. Because if you can write one good story, you can write one good book. But we're just going to focus on one story. And that's what feels so good to see people really, because so many people come in with this huge story, and I was that person, just going off in all these different directions. And so we just get you really focused, and you write that one good story, and then you write the next good story, and then you write the next good story. And then you end up having a book or a TED Talk or a lot of great material for newsletters or podcasts.
Oh, I love that. And so do you see the difference between like journaling versus writing? Like, because I love to journal. Yeah.
So journaling is very important. And I know most people, the Artist Way, I think, is this 25 years anniversary. Many people have done the Artist Way, which is you do just write 3 pages in the morning and you never look back at it again. And that's getting out, that's more of like, this happened to me. And, it can be more, it's not writing that you're not supposed to ever read it again, but I wanted people to start structuring stories. So I do believe in journaling. And then after you journal, I believe in spending 15 minutes a day on a writing prompt.
Gotcha.
And because we need to know, especially if we are working in an area where we are coaches or selling online or branding ourselves, we need to be able to tell a story. And who we're selling we're selling ourselves, we're selling our story.
Yeah.
So what we're not, 3 pages of victim me, like nobody wants to hear from me. I was divorced, and then and then he married the nanny, and then I got rid of my house, and I've been sexually like, no, those are like these stories like, oh my gosh, I don't want to hear that.
Yeah.
But when we start the story from a place of I was my former husband took my house away, so I just decided to go purge all my stuff and live around the world for and explore at the age of 50 what it's like to live without things. That story is going to pull readers in versus like all these bad things happened to me. And that's my journal pages would be about the bad things that happened to me. My storytelling would be about maybe something that happened to me and then what I did with it to, live in the direction of my dreams.
And that's what you did, right? You traveled for a while. You didn't really have a home base. Your home was your body, right?
Yeah. And I think that was when we talk about, our soul work. And once again, I grew up in the, Methodist church in conservative Indiana. There was no talk about soul work. We believed in the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit and good marriages. And suddenly I'm, in my middle 40s, divorced, my kids are away from home, and I've never had an orgasm. And and then finally start realizing, having these memories of being, molested when I was younger, and starting to put the connection together of why I didn't feel good in my body, why I didn't feel safe in my body. So, it's writing is a way to go, back and look at our life story, and then, really make ourselves the hero of our life story. And so I was living without a home for the last 5 years. I still live in an Airbnb. And it's interesting because I just committed for 9 months in this Airbnb. I've been living like 2 and 3 months at a time. And it was working. It was great. And then right now I'm really wanting to be at home. I live close to my grandchildren. I realize the moving around is impacting me finishing the next book. And I also want to grow community where I live. And I like my solo show and retreats I was doing in other places. And I live in this beautiful place. So I'm really committing to having writing workshops and retreats here. And and just being here. So but the gift was, as you said, I was able to remember that my first home was my body. And I think that was a gift from not having a home.
That's awesome. I love that, like, you technically signed a lease.
I know. Well, it's so funny. I talk about this in my next book that's coming out, Chasing Temples, of after I got a divorce. This is 20 years ago. And this was like early internet dating was just becoming popular. And so I looked at, there were only a few, there weren't that many sites then, but I looked at, Match and several sites, and I decided that eHarmony was the, best site, the women in those pictures. And, if I'm bringing a man into my children's life, it's got to be the eHarmony, the soulmates. And so eHarmony, they ask you to fill out like a 60 question personality profile of how you see yourself and how your friends see you. So I, spent one Friday night doing that when my kids weren't home. And after I filled it out, I pressed send, and a screen comes up and it says, in just a few minutes, we're going to have the results of your personality profile. And I had the credit card ready to pay $250, and it says, potential, maybe even your potential soulmate. And I'm like, $250 is a great deal for a soulmate. And after a few minutes, it said, we're sorry, but in a low percentage of cases, we find that we can't offer you a membership because we want to set up long-term relationships, and your personality is not conducive to long-term relationships.
Are you kidding?
And I was like, I do long-term relationships. And then I realized the last 6 years, I have not been able to commit to a home for more than 3 months at a time. So this might be an area that I need to work on.
Oh my goodness. That's awesome,
I was rejected by eHarmony. I know.
Hey, you saved your $250.
I know. Well, and then a couple years later, I was at dinner at a dinner, and one of the men there brought a woman from LA, and she was a beautiful model and actress. And I was asking her what she's done recently, and she said, "Oh, I'm in the new eHarmony commercial." And I'm like, those aren't real people? And she's like, no, they're all actors. I was like, well, good. I'm glad I didn't give them my money.
Oh, wow. That's, eHarmony. I've been on that a few times.
Yeah.
Oh, geez. Well, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. And I'm just so grateful we had the chance to connect. And I love that your work is really about bringing out women's voices and their pleasure. Yeah.
Well, and thank you for your podcast and the diverse subjects and groups and women that you bring on. And I love that you are really aligned with also empowering women's voices and allowing them to be heard.
Thank you. How can people learn more about you?
My website is betsybmurphy.com, and I'm most active on Instagram, which is the same, Betsy B. Murphy. If you send me private messages through my website or on Instagram, I'll get them, and it's only me responding. I don't do Messenger, so on Facebook. So
yeah, it was funny that I caught you.
Yeah, I know. I know. Thank
awesome.
you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and I'll also put the links to your books, and you have upcoming retreats as well.
I have, write some online, actually writing circles starting in February, March and April. And then I will announce other retreats in California within the next month or so.
Okay, perfect. Well, for our listeners, they could totally stalk you for California retreats. Yeah. So, well, thank you so much, Betsy, for your time and for being on the show.
Thank you, Michelle.
Take care.
Join our free private Facebook group community, Sacred Emergence, to receive more connection, guidance, and support, and take part in our 5-day Inner Confidence Challenge to not only boost your confidence, but to help activate your inner leadership. Details in the show notes. Thank you for listening to the Sacred Emergence podcast. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and thank you in advance for sharing this with others who can benefit. Until next time.